Dr. Carl Jung was somebody who was a famous psychiatrist and psychologist, psychoanalyst throughout history who really tells us some really deep insights about our current world. Yes, this crazy mad world that we live in, that you might be confused in, and I don't blame you, for I am too. But within this confusion, we gotta be able to navigate through it, and in his book, he gives us a lot of very helpful tips of advice that you're not likely going to hear anywhere else. We've been studying in this series of videos that we've been doing The Undiscovered Self by Dr. Carl Jung. This is the last book that he wrote before his death, talking about the nature of statism, a word not a lot of people have heard of, and political servitude. Last time we discovered that the state replaced God in the hearts and minds of men. Where men used to worship gods, humans now worship governments, and because of the nature of human government, the end result of this process has been, well, the bloodiest, most horrific bloodshed and mass oppression in human history. You can look at democide, the top cause of unnatural death, and that could be quite evident. Continuing to build on the insights of Dr. Carl Jung, we can now explore in what ways, how, and why we empower the cult of the state through our own actions. Dr. Jung makes these very powerful statements, and we need to be willing to escape our mental box, our mental chains, to embrace this new, better reality moving forward. Dr. Jung starts off by explaining how modern people find themselves divided between their conscious beliefs, the things they've been taught to think and understand about the world all their lives, and the subconscious truths that they know instinctively. The conflict between these two, if not reconciled, leads not only to a divided individual warring between his conscious and unconscious selves, but a neurotic and divided society where the individual personal war is acted out externally through mass political action. When the majority of your society is mentally unbalanced, your entire society becomes insane. Quote, "Separation from his instinctual nature inevitably plunges civilized man into the conflict between conscious and unconscious, spirit and nature, knowledge and faith, a split that becomes pathological the moment his consciousness is no longer able to neglect or suppress his instinctual side. The accumulation of individuals who have got into this critical state starts off a mass movement purporting to be the champion of the suppressed, in accordance with the prevailing tendency of consciousness to seek the source of all ills in the outside world. The cry goes up for political and social changes which, it is supposed, would automatically solve the much deeper problem of split personality. Hence, it is that whenever this demand is fulfilled, political and social conditions arise which brings the same ills back again in altered form. What then happens is a simple reversal. The underside comes to the top and the shadow takes the place of the light. And since the former is always anarchic and turbulent, the freedom of the liberated underdog must suffer draconian curtailment. All this is unavoidable because the root of the evil is untouched and merely the counterposition has come to light." End quote. So as you can tell, this gets very deep into sort of the psychology of how humans go about in politics. And we don't always look at the morality or psychology within politics, but that's exactly what we're doing here. Now that quote was from page 58, and I don't think I've read a better explanation of the chaos in the streets, the protest and counter-protest, the violence, brutality, and hatred promoted as justice, the continual vacillation of society between political parties, always looking for one to save them from the other, of the poison of modern politics. Unable to solve what is essentially an internal problem, the emotional, mental, and spiritual malaise that seems to have infected all of society, we have externalized it. The problem originates not with us, but some other group or problem, and the masses must organize to destroy the existing order and reform it by eliminating the scapegoated other and bring society into conformity with the ideal. By doing this, the masses and the individual who belongs to that mass hope to heal the division within theirself. Because we have externalized and politicized our own mental instability, the natural organization to which one looks to exert such a powerful reformation is, of course, the government, the state, where a lot of people will turn to help change the world. Is it really going to help, though? With its big battle-ons and crushing power, we make the dream a reality by punishing the heretic and compelling the resistant through overwhelming force, with ultimate faith in the belief that if we can heal the external world, then we can heal our internal world. In this political competition, the political parties take turns acting as the individual shadow and light of the masses. For the Democrat, the Republican becomes the shadow, the monster upon which the Democrat can externalize all those internal monsters which she hates about herself. The Democratic Party becomes the light side, which will act as the vehicle by which the member will achieve peace and political utopia. This holds true for the Republicans, and it turns true for the Democrats. The other is always lurking there, corrupting the process and poisoning the palpable possibility of perfection. If only the opposition would just get out of the way, we might say. But of course, they don't. Monsters don't do that, so they need to be derided and destroyed. You don't compromise with monsters. You don't leave them to live their own lives. You slay monsters. Of course, none of this ever works. Nothing is made better because you've exchanged your partisan light for the enemy's shadow by electing the man or woman who you have idolized. The true problem, the internal problem, has never been healed. It merely becomes fodder for politicians to take advantage of in the next round of elections. Our individual and mass neuroses are the paths to their power, to their wealth, and their glory. Because of this, politicians may claim to want to heal society's wounds, but in reality, they do nothing but exacerbate them. The more external faction, and failure that can be sowed, the more desperate and anxious and fearful the masses can be made. The more those same masses will look to those in power to save them. The most politicians do is change the names of the problems, often convincing the broken and indoctrinated masses that good is evil and evil is good in the process. This only deepens the neuroses of society, and the individual, as evil corrupts, brings misery and leads to self and social destruction. There is hope, though. There are those who, by the nature of their beliefs, perceive and interact with the world on an entirely different term than those laid out by the state. May we look at the power of true faith to combat the indoctrination and insanity of the state. We've talked about in our previous articles and videos how faith and religion can be used to challenge the authorities of these man-made worldly institutions, because you recognize a higher authority than man. You recognize God. Now, even if you don't come from that point of view, you may say you understand nature or natural law or something higher. It can just be your conscience, because you recognize you should always do what is right as opposed to wrong, and that morality is not legality. If you look at this through any one of these perspectives, the whole system of man-made government and politics will fall apart, because it relies on a contradiction of morals. If I put some questions on the screen for you, you will see this evident for yourself. Now, in addition to this understanding of statism, or what Carl Jung calls political doctrine, the inverse of statism is voluntarism, which is the idea that you want a voluntary free world. This can be seen as the solution, intertwined with faith and natural law and morality, because voluntary interaction is moral action. Generally speaking, we all do it on an everyday basis. But in politics, we create the exception and say, well, it's okay that we're imposing our will on our fellow man using violence, but we call it law, we call it taxation even though it's theft, and therefore it's legitimized because some authority figure did it? No. Voluntarism makes it clear. Always create voluntary action. Do not excuse violence. Do not excuse involuntary action and involuntary hierarchies. People can get together, they can voluntarily organize, and we can create all the solutions in the world, just as we do in the food system, because people want food and they need food. But we don't make some justification and say, well, because these people will starve, we need to make sure that everybody is robbed from and everybody is coerced for the possibility that this one person is going to get hurt. We don't make those justifications. We find it silly. And there's a reason why there's charity and there's churches, and they do these things where they feed the homeless and they try to help them out, because there is a good side to humanity, and there's also definitely a bad side to humanity. The whole idea of not creating that seat of power and giving people power and believing in their authority is so that way evil cannot grow. It's the very idea of life will never be perfect. Don't try to make it perfect. Anarchy or voluntarism is the simple realization that you can't make it perfect, that humans will always do bad, and that simply you cannot give them the permission to do bad. Because that's what happens when you give them authority. That's what happens when you allow them to cloak their actions in a sense of moral legitimacy by calling theft taxation. So hopefully you understand the point I'm making, but if you don't, I wouldn't blame you. I wasn't certainly understanding this when I first came across it, but you can learn more. Go to theliberator.us. That's theliberator.us. I do all this work totally for free and educationally. You can also send me your article. I'll turn to a video for you. This great article was done by my co-editor, William H. Douglas. His website is thelatterdayLiberator.com. That's thelatterdayLiberator.com. But again, we have documentaries, we have books, and a lot of this is untold knowledge that you're not going to likely hear about anywhere else. So be sure to check it out. Thank you very much for watching.